Okay, so basically what we want to cover in by the time we finish object-oriented programming is how to create and instantiate a class, inheritance in object-oriented programming, then instance and class variables, their differences and really how useful they are, then static methods and class methods, property decorators, magic or Danda methods, projects, and then of course we'll do another project. Last time we built a calculator using Tkinter as the GUI framework, and I mentioned that we will build the same thing, but this time using the object-oriented programming paradigm. Last time we used a functional programming approach, so hopefully we would have a real life feel of the differences between functional programming and object-oriented programming. So first of all, why use classes? Why use object-oriented programming paradigm? All right. Now, the main reason is, and you are going to see that several organizations and really modern programming, most modern frameworks and maybe firms that you're going to be with, they use the object-oriented programming approach, and that's for a good reason. The reason is that this approach allows data and functions to be logically grouped for easy reusability of code, scalability, and also code readability. So for example, obviously it's not always the same person, especially in an organization set. It's not the same person that uh, works on the same projects, right? So it's always several people, and it's very important for them to be able to understand the code. It's important for the particular program to be scalable so that we can build upon it. And this object-oriented approach and classes really allow this to be easy. So and when I said data and functions, in object-oriented programming, we refer to those as attributes and methods. So you're going to see me mentioning this quite a lot. So let's just get this right. So whenever I say data for instance, that is what in object-oriented programming we refer to as attributes. So that would basically be like variables. So what you would normally call variables in normally inside objects, they will be called attributes, and then functions is what we refer to as methods in object-oriented programming. All right, so that's really what it is. Okay, so a method is a function associated with a class. All right, so let's get started. Enough of my rambling, let's get started. Okay, so what a class is basically a blueprint of, say, a particular thing. So for example, let's say we are building an application for employees. So say we want to store data of our employees, right? So we are an organization and then we want to store data for employees. So we might want to have an employee class so that any new employee that we bring upon it will basically build them using the blueprint that we created with our class. So that's really what a class is. And then a class is basically the blueprint of a particular object. And then whenever we now create an actual object using that class, we say that is an instance of the class. So let's create our employee. Let me comment this. So employee, what am I doing? Employee class. So we have class employee, and really this is it. So by doing this, we have defined that, okay, we're going to have an object, we're going to be using objects called employee, right? Employees, essentially. Now this could be it, but then in Python, if you were to run this would give you an error because there's nothing in it, right? So if whenever you want to, like, you have a block of code but you don't want to really write in it yet, you want to leave it and maybe come back to it later, use the pass keyword to show that, okay, you come back to this, right? So you find that this runs with no errors. But then of course I didn't we didn't put in any functionality in here. Now that's for a reason, because right now I just want to show you the differences between an instance of a class, the differences between a class and an instance of a class. I feel like the document I put on the Google Classroom didn't quite clarify that. Well, maybe you guys understood it, but I just feel I should do a little bit more. So now we have a class like this, class employee. So let's say we have employee 1. So we could create an object, an employee, using this class by saying employee 1. And this is a variable. You can name it whatever you want. I want to call it employee 1. And then since we are going to build it using this particular blueprint, we say employee 1 is equal to employee, like this. Okay, let's create another employee. Employee 2 is equal to employee also. So it is since we created these two variables using this class, we say these are instances of this particular class. All right, I hope that is clear. So this, so you find that if we were to print these, for instance, so let's say print employee 1. Let me pull this up just so that we can see my results a little clearer. And print employee 2. So if we were to print this, now notice what we have here. We have this telling us that, okay, this, so for instance, the first print statement will say this is an employee object at the memory location this. So you notice that the memory addresses are different. That tells us that these are two different objects, but they were both built using this particular blueprint. Okay, so it's an employee object. Okay, so I hope that part is clear. So now, of course, this is like an empty class, and we need to actually give them attributes. So we know that whenever you have an employee, so let me just show this with a comment. Employees have names, so they have first names, last name. So maybe these are the data we want to store about the employee. All right, so first name, last name, maybe email, maybe their pay. All right, so we can manually create these variables. We can manually create these variables for each of our employees. So for example, we could say employee 1 dot first, let's just say first name is equal to, let's say, no, and then employee 1 dot last name. So employee 1's last name would be, say, Karim. All right, now if we were to print that down here, let me just push this up. So if we were to say print employee 1 dot first name, and we'll get no. If we were to print his last name, we would get Karim. Now we could do the same thing for employee 2. Employee 2 dot first name could be, say, text. Employee 2 dot last name would be user. All right, so if we were to say employee 2 here, it will give us the last name of employee 2, which is user. And of course, we could also create the employee's email address. Employee 1 dot email will be equal to maybe @site.com, and you have to put this in quotes. All right, and then if we were to print out employee 1 dot email, this gives us the email address of employee 1. So basically, we could create these variables manually like this. But then, of course, you can probably already see that no, so let's say we are going to have like 100 employees. Are we going to then create all of these variables for them one by one like that? That would defeat the entire purpose of scalability, right? Now that is where we begin to fill this class with stuff. Of course, you could have just left it this way and then you keep defining it. Yeah, you can do that. But then, what if we want to automatically generate these variables for each of our employees at the time that they were instantiated. And when I say instantiated, whenever we do this, what we have done is we have instantiated an object of employee. So we have instantiated this object and we have instantiated that object. So what if we want all these variables to be automatically assigned to this at the time we are instantiating it? And that is when we come in here and then we use a particular method known as the init method. Init method like this. Now, these are part of a group of methods known as magic methods in Python, but we'll talk more about them in future. For now, just know that this is a method that automatically assigns variables to our objects at the time that we instantiate them. Okay, so whenever you have a method inside a class, any method at all, it must take a first variable called self, or you can actually name this anything, but then the convention is self, so it is important to stick with convention. Now, it always takes the self because whenever you instantiate this, it accepts this as the instance that you have just created. Okay, your instantiation is passed in as self. So this is important whenever you create a function, in this case a method, of course. Remember I said functions in classes are known as methods. So whenever you create a method, the first argument must always be the self argument, which represents the instance of that particular object. Okay, so once we have passed in the instance, then we can now pass in the variables we want to declare for every object. So for instance, of course, we want them to have first names, then we want them to have last names, then we want them to have pays, for instance. For the email, we can actually generate it using the first name. So let's define this. So now whenever you do this, right, we now want to store this as variables of the instance. We want to store this as instance variables. So you see what I have created here are instance variables. So this first name is an instance, is a variable of the instance employee 1. Last name is a variable of the instance employee 1. And email is also a variable of the instance employee 1, and their values are these, as you can see. So now we want to automatically create those instance variables. So you have to use the self here. So you say self dot first name equal to the first name that you just passed here. Now observe this very well. What we are doing here, this line right here, is exactly the same as what we did here. The only difference is that here, instead of employee 1, we put self here. That is because whenever we generate this instance, this function will pass this name as this. So the function will actually read employee 1 dot first name equal to what has been passed, first name. So instead of doing it manually, we are now allowing this function to do it for us automatically. Okay, so we'll do the same for the others. So we say self dot last name equals last name, self dot pay equals pay. Okay, so now that we have done this, at the point that we are instantiating these objects, we now need to pass the values of our instance variables in there. Okay, so we could say, so of course, now remember in this function the first argument was self. Now we don't need to pass that argument, because that will be done automatically. It will take this and pass it there. This function will do that automatically. So all we have to focus on is the variables that we want to declare. So the first name that we want to pass is say no, the last name Karim, and pay say whatever, let's just say 2,005 or 25,000, whatever. Okay, and employee 2 would be say delegate, and I don't remember your last name, so I'm just going to put anything, the other person's name, Anthony, and then pay maybe 30,000, right? And now instead of, so of course you see that we don't need to do this anymore because we've done that automatically. We don't need to do this anymore. So you can see that we can print employee. Okay, employee one, we can print employee one's first name, and then we can also print employee two's first name. So all I need to do here is change employee 2, and then when we run this, you'll see employee 1's name is null, employee 2's first name is delegate. And like I said, we can generate the email automatically, right? So we could come down here inside the class. We could come down here and say self.email, and then we generate that using the first name. So we could say first name plus, so we are going to concatenate a string at maybe site.com. So when we come down here and call the email, so let's say print, so we want to print employee choose email, and that will give us delegate at site.com. Okay, so this is essentially, instance variables and how we make them automatically created for us. And again, we use the init magic method. All right, so instead of just to go over a little bit, so instead of manually creating these variables for each and every employee, we use this init function, which is a constructor. In other programming languages, they call these constructors. So we use this to automatically construct these variables for them, okay, so that we don't need to really repeat ourselves. For instance, if we had 100 employees, so all we need to do is declare this employee has these values and that employee has these values. If we had a third employee, it wouldn't be much different. So we would say employee, and then we would say name or first name, last name, and pay. So maybe 30,000, and then you will see that this would automatically create everything. Okay, all right, so now one last thing before I leave you guys. What if we want to add some functionality to our object? So for instance, we want it to be able to tell us what the full name of the employee is. All right, that is where we use a method. All right, so this is a method that we are going to generate ourselves. Now remember, I said whenever you declare a method inside of a class, you need to pass in the first argument as self. That's precisely what we would need to do here. So we say define. So let's call this function full name. We can call it anything, but it has to be as readable as possible. So the first argument we pass in is self, but then we don't need to pass in any other argument, so we leave it like that. So all this method is going to do is return the full name. So we just say return, and then we say first name, but we can't say first name like that because it's inside a class. We need to specify it using the self, so that every single time it is called, it passes that particular instance here, right? So we are going to say self.firstName, all right, plus, now of course we need to add space, so that it doesn't mush them together. Then we call self.lastName, and this is going to return the full name. Now, just to go over, when this function is called full name, it will also pass this instance as self right here, so that whichever one it is calling would be the object that is calling for that particular function. So that's the trick here. So once we do this, we can come down here. So I'm just going to delete all these and then say print employee one's full name. So full name, and we need to specify the two curly braces, the two parentheses, because we want the function to run. Okay, so once we do that, save and run, we see that this returns the full name. This prints out the full name. We can do the same thing for employee 2, and then this will, give us delegate Anthony. We can do the same for employee 3 since we have employee 3. Sorry about that. And oops, and this returns first name, last name. Okay, so this is how to incorporate a function into our class. And again, a function inside a class is known as a method. So this is pretty much what I wanted to share with you today. Now, before I go away, I want to give you a few pointers, and that is common errors that you might have come up with whenever you are creating a method, right? The common errors that I've seen people make is that they forget to pass the self argument. Okay, so just so that you see what is going on, I'm going to remove this self. Okay, and then we'll see what happens when we try to run this. So when we do that, see what happens. It gives us an error. Now read this error. Now I know you guys don't like reading errors, but you really must enjoy it, because if for instance you have an hour to do something, I can almost guarantee you that 45 minutes of that time is going to be used debugging it, meaning looking through errors. So you have to learn to be able to learn from errors and then go back and correct your code. Now listen to what this says. Type error. Full name takes 0 positional arguments, but 1 was given. Alright? What does that mean? It takes 0 position, meaning when we declared this function, we are saying that it should not take any argument, but 1 was given. Wait, you didn't give 1, right? You're probably thinking, wait, but I didn't give 1 argument. No, you didn't, but it was automatically sent in. The moment you created this, now there's an instance. It will automatically be passed in any function. And you did not declare anything. We didn't declare anything to receive it here. Alright? So that is why we do this. Alright? Now, one more thing. So another error is, for instance, when calling the function, you'll see that people don't bring in the 2 parentheses. Let's see what happens when we try to do that. Now you see that this doesn't bring an error, but it doesn't run the function either. It only tells us that, hey, this is a method, and it is a method of this particular object, the employee object, and it is located at this memory address. So when you just try to print the name of a method, even a normal function, it will give you information about it. It will not run it. So if you want to run it, you need to call it using the 2 parentheses. Alright, I hope this was clear. Next time we are going to look at class variables. Alright, so until next time, if you have any questions, you can ask them on the Google Classroom or on our WhatsApp group. And you can rewind and go and watch this video 100 or even 1,000 times if you need to, and that would be fine. Repeat me anyhow you want. I can almost guarantee you I will not complain. Alright, so until next time, peace out.